All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tackling a massive topic, the story of Russia, the biggest country on the planet. The question is, how did it get that way?
Just try to wrap your head around this. We're talking about one single country that covers more than an eighth of all the inhabited land on Earth. It's a place of superlatives, so big it almost defies a simple explanation.
And to really get a sense of that scale, think about this. When folks in Moscow are maybe winding down for dinner, way over on Russia's Pacific coast, the sun is already coming up on a new day. Yep, this one country stretches across a mind-boggling 9 time zones.
So, all of this naturally leads to the big question, right? How in the world did one nation get so huge and come to dominate the map like this? That's what we're going to dig into today.
Okay, to get to the bottom of this, we've got to go way back, like over 1,000 years back, to the very beginning, to the birth of a state they called Rus. This is where it all starts.
So the story doesn't start with some giant, sprawling empire. Nope. It begins with this, the medieval state of Kievan Rus. You can think of it as a loose collection of East Slavic tribes, all centered around what is now Kiev. And, get this, it was actually founded by Vikings, Varangians they were called, who came down from the north and really left their mark.
Then comes a huge turning point. We're in the year 988, and the ruler Vladimir the Great makes a massive decision. He adopts Orthodox Christianity from the powerful Byzantine Empire. This one choice would go on to shape Russia's entire cultural and spiritual identity for, well, the next 1,000 years.
But, this early state, it wasn't built to last. It was already being torn apart by conflicts from within, and then came the final blow, the Mongol invasion. For centuries, the Russian principalities were forced to live under the rule of the Golden Horde. It was a period of foreign domination that would absolutely leave its mark.
But out of this period of Mongol rule, a new center of power started to rise. And this wasn't just any power. This was a force that would not only bring the lands of Rus back together, but would kick off an era of expansion like nothing seen before, forging a true empire.
You see, the story of the Russian Empire is really a story of some incredibly powerful and ambitious leaders. It all starts with the Grand Duchy of Moscow, which, under a guy named Ivan III, finally threw off what they called the Mongol yoke. And from that point on, it was just one formidable leader after another, each one adding more land and shaping the country's destiny.
And what's just wild is the sheer ambition of these rulers. You have Ivan IV, famously known as the Terrible. He was the first to call himself Tsar, like Caesar, and he went on to nearly double Russia's territory. Then you get Peter the Great, this total visionary who comes in, modernizes the state, builds St. Petersburg as a window to Europe, and then officially declares Russia an empire. He completely changed the game. So, through a mix of straight-up conquest, taking over territory, and just this relentless push eastward across Siberia, the Tsardom ballooned into the massive Russian Empire. By 1866, look at it. It was the third largest empire in history. It stretched all the way from Poland deep in Europe, across Asia, and even over to Alaska. But this huge empire, ruled by czars for hundreds of years, was heading for a cliff, a complete rupture that wasn't just going to transform Russia, it was going to change the entire world. The empire was already weakened, really battered by the incredible strain of World War I. So the monarchy just collapses. And in 1917, the October Revolution, led by the brilliant but totally ruthless Vladimir Lenin and his Bolsheviks, just sweeps away the old world. And in its place, a radical new kind of state is born. And here's the key thing to understand. Russia becomes the core of this new entity, the Soviet Union. It was the world's very first nation built on the ideology of socialism. The goal was to remake society from the top down, a really grand and, as we now know, ultimately tragic experiment.
So most of the old empire's territory was put back together, but now it was called the USSR. And after playing an absolutely decisive and incredibly brutal role in defeating Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union rises from the ashes of World War II as one of the planet's 2 global superpowers, staring down the United States.
But the price of that victory, it's just staggering. We're talking an estimated 26.5 million Soviet deaths in World War II, and that's counting both soldiers and civilians. To put that in perspective, that's about a third of all the casualties in the entire war, worldwide. An unbelievable loss that would leave these deep, deep scars on the nation for generations.
And at the exact same time, the Soviet era was defined by this brutal, relentless repression of its own people. Under Stalin's iron grip, millions were sent to the infamous labor camps, the gulags. It's just a horrifying chapter of forced labor and political terror.
But here's the paradox, and it's a fascinating one. This was also an era of unbelievable technological breakthroughs. Locked in the Cold War with the US, the USSR absolutely stunned the world. They launched Sputnik, the very first satellite, and then they sent Yuri Gagarin, the first human being into outer space. They literally kicked off the space age.
So after decades as this global superpower, the whole Soviet experiment just comes to a sudden, dramatic end, and this leads to the birth of the nation we see on the map today, a new Russia, facing a whole new world of challenges.
What happened? Well, the system was rotting from the inside. It was plagued by economic problems that just wouldn't go away, and it was being drained by these expensive foreign wars, like the absolute disaster in Afghanistan. The whole thing, which once looked so powerful, just started to crumble. And then, the final curtain fell. In 1991, the Soviet Union, this mighty superpower that had shaped the world for nearly 70 years, was officially dissolved. Just like that, the Cold War was over, and this massive country splintered into 15 brand new independent nations.
Now, the biggest of these new countries was, of course, the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic. It remade itself into what we now know as the Russian Federation, and it inherited the whole complicated legacy of the USSR, its nuclear arsenal, its seat on the UN Security Council, all the things that guaranteed Russia would still be a major force to be reckoned with.
And so, here we are, full circle. From a small medieval state on a river, to a massive Tsarist empire, to a global socialist superpower, and now, a modern federation. Russia has never stopped changing, and that brings us to the big question for today and for tomorrow. What will Russia's next chapter look like? And how is it going to shape the world we all live in?